The air in the conference room was thick with anticipation as I stepped up to the projector screen, my portfolio clutched to my chest like a shield. The scent of expensive cologne and quiet ambition hung in the air, a familiar perfume in the halls of Salvator Luxe Fashions. I'd spent months perfecting my youth collection, drawing inspiration from the vibrant street art that decorated Miami's Wynwood district. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the leather-bound portfolio, a small betrayal of the confidence I was attempting to project. "As you can see," I began, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in my stomach, "the vibrant youth collection brings an authenticity to our brand that we've been missing in the under-25 demographic." My father, Vincent Salvator, sat at the head of the mahogany table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his eyes revealing nothing as they scanned my designs. Next to him, my brothers Nicholas and Leo watched with expressions I couldn't quite read. The rest of the board members, mostly old friends of my father, nodded politely, but I knew their opinions weren't what mattered. In this room, only the Salvator men had real power. I continued my presentation, pointing out the innovative cuts, the sustainable fabrics, the market research I'd conducted that showed an opening in the luxury space for designs that spoke to younger consumers without compromising quality. This collection was my heart laid bare, the culmination of my design education, and the instincts I'd inherited from generations of Salvators before me. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, then Vincent cleared his throat. "Thank you, Alina," he said, using the formal version of my name he reserved for business settings. "Nicholas has also been working on something for our younger demographic. Nicholas, would you like to present now?" The betrayal hit me before I even saw the slides. Something in my father's tone, in the way Nicholas stood up with a confidence that bordered on smugness, told me what was coming. And then I saw them, my designs. Not exact copies, no. They'd been altered just enough to avoid being carbon copies, but the essence, the soul of my collection was there on Nicholas's slides. The same color palette, the same silhouettes, even the street art-inspired prints, though with different motifs. "As you can see," Nicholas was saying, his voice echoing my own presentation from minutes before, "the Urban Elite Collection addresses the gap in our offerings for younger consumers." My vision blurred. The room seemed to tilt on its axis as blood rushed to my head. I gripped the edge of the table, willing myself not to make a scene, not to let them see how deeply the knife had twisted. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "Those are my designs." Nicholas barely paused. "Elena, we discussed similar concepts months ago. Great minds think alike, I suppose." His smile was empty, practiced. I looked to my father, waiting for him to step in to acknowledge what was happening. But Vincent merely looked between us, his expression impassive. "Nicholas has been developing this concept for quite some time," he said finally. "The board and I feel his vision aligns more closely with our current direction." I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on me, some pitying, some uncomfortable, some deliberately looking away. My brother Leo studied his manicured nails, refusing to meet my gaze. "I see," I said, the words like ash in my mouth. The meeting continued around me. I sat frozen, feeling like I was watching the scene from above, detached from my body. They discussed production timelines, marketing strategies, all based on my brother's innovative collection. No one acknowledged what had just happened. No one stood up for me. Later, in Vincent's office, I confronted him. The space was intimidating by design, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the Miami skyline, awards and recognitions lining the walls, a desk large enough to compensate for any insecurity. "You know, those were my designs," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Nicholas took my work and you let him." Vincent sighed, leaning back in his leather chair. "Elena, you're a talented designer, one of the best we have. But this is business, and Nicholas has the vision to lead the company forward." "Because he's your son and I'm just your daughter." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "Because he understands that Salvator Luxe isn't an art project. It's a business." Vincent's tone shifted, hardening. "Besides, all designs created under this roof belong to the company. Nicholas simply had a better presentation strategy." I felt something break inside me then. A faith, a hope I hadn't even realized I was clinging to. The belief that eventually my father would see me, really see me, and the work I poured my soul into. "I've given everything to this company," I said quietly. My talent, my ideas, my time away from my daughters, and this is how you repay me." Vincent's expression softened slightly. "Alina, you're being dramatic. This is one collection. There will be others." "Others for Nicholas to steal, others for you to dismiss." I shook my head. "No, not anymore." I walked out of his office, out of the building that bore my family name, and into the humid Miami afternoon. The sun was almost painfully bright, as if illuminating a world I was seeing clearly for the first time. That was the day I, Alina Salveter, walked away from my family legacy. What I didn't know then was that it was just the beginning of my unraveling, and that the path to redemption would be longer and harder than I could have imagined. The first mistake I made after leaving Salveter Lux was marrying Daniel Mendez. To be fair, Daniel hadn't always been a monster. When we met at a gallery opening shortly after I left my family's company, he'd been charming, attentive, ambitious. A real estate developer with connections throughout Miami, he seemed to offer everything I needed: support, stability, a belief in my talents that my family had never shown. The courtship was swift and intoxicating. Within 6 months, we were married, and I moved my daughters, Olivia and Mia, into his waterfront condo in Brickell. I converted one of the spare bedrooms into a studio and started freelancing, designing bespoke pieces for private clients. It wasn't the career I'd envisioned, but it kept my creativity alive while I figured out my next steps. For a while, things were good. Daniel was proud to have a Salveter on his arm at social events, introducing me as the genius designer to his business associates. He encouraged me to start my own label, even offering to invest in it. But when his real estate deals started falling through, the facade cracked. The charming man disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who drank too much, who blamed me for his failures, who monitored my spending and questioned my every move. "Where are you going?" Daniel's voice sliced through the quiet morning as I gathered my sketchbooks. I was meeting with a potential client, a socialite who wanted a custom gown for a charity benefit. "I told you last night. I have a client meeting at the Standard." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He'd come home late, reeking of whiskey. Another deal had fallen through, something about zoning regulations and permits. These days, it was always something. "With who?" "Camila Rodriguez, she's..." "The banker's wife," Daniel cut me off. "I know who she is. I didn't realize you were so friendly with the Rodriguez family." I took a steadying breath. "It's a business meeting, Daniel. She wants to commission a gown." He scoffed, pouring coffee into a mug with hands that trembled slightly. "Playing with your little drawings while I'm trying to keep us afloat. What does a custom gown pay these days? Enough for the mortgage, for the girls' school tuition." I flinched. Money was tight, yes. Daniel's most recent ventures hadn't panned out, and the lifestyle he insisted on maintaining was expensive. But my commissions were bringing in steady income, not enough to support us entirely, but I was contributing. More than that, they were keeping me sane, giving me purpose. "I'm doing my part," I said quietly, mindful that Olivia and Mia were still asleep down the hall. "My work is helping." "Your work," Daniel spat the word like it tasted bad. "Playing fashion designer won't save us, Alina. Your father was right about you. All talent, no business sense." The mention of my father was calculated, a precise twist of the knife. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself against the counter. "I need to go. I'll be back by 3 to pick up the girls from school." I turned to leave, but Daniel's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with enough force to make me gasp. "Maybe it's time you went crawling back to Daddy," he hissed, his face close to mine. "Beg for your job back. At least then you'd be bringing in real money." I wrenched my arm free, my heart hammering. "Never." The slap came fast, a crack of sound that seemed to echo in the sleek, modern kitchen. My cheek burned, and for a moment shock rendered me immobile. Daniel had been verbally cruel before, controlling, but this was new. This was a line crossed. "Mommy." We both turned to see Olivia standing in the doorway, her 8-year-old face crumpled in confusion and fear. Behind her, 6-year-old Mia peered around her sister's shoulder, eyes wide. Daniel stepped back, his expression shifting instantly to contrition. "Alina, I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "Girls, go get dressed for school," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I'll be there in a minute to help with your hair." They hesitated, sensing the wrongness in the air. "Go on," I said more firmly, and they retreated down the hall. When they were gone, I turned back to Daniel. seeing him with a clarity that had been building for months. "If you ever touch me like that again, especially in front of my daughters, we're done," I said, my voice low but steady. "Do you understand me?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mixture of shame and defiance. "I'm under a lot of pressure right now, Alina. You know that. It won't happen again." But it did happen again, and again. The incidents were always followed by apologies, by promises, by brief periods of the old Daniel returning, attentive, supportive. But those periods grew shorter, the explosions more frequent. I started planning my escape 6 months after that first slap. Not just for me, but for my daughters, who were growing quiet and watchful, who startled at loud noises, who were learning lessons about love and partnership that I couldn't bear for them to carry into adulthood. I set aside money from each commission, opening a separate account at a different bank. I researched apartments in Fort Lauderdale, far enough from Miami to make a clean break, but close enough to maintain relationships with my clients. I copied important documents and stored them at my friend Elaine's apartment. And then I waited for an opportunity. It came on a Friday in August, when Daniel announced he was flying to New York for a meeting with potential investors. The moment his car pulled away from the condo, I sprang into action. "Girls, we're going on an adventure," I told Olivia and Mia as I pulled suitcases from the closet. "Pack your favorite clothes and toys, just what you love the most." They looked confused but excited, helping me load our essentials into the car. I left my wedding ring on the bedside table along with a note: "We deserve better than this. Don't try to find us." By nightfall, we were settled into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet Fort Lauderdale neighborhood. The furniture was second-hand, the decor sparse, but it was ours. Safe, the beginning of our new life. That night, after the girls were asleep, I sat on the small balcony with a glass of wine, looking at the unfamiliar skyline. Without the trappings of wealth, the designer clothes, the luxury condo, the Salvetter name, who was I? What did I have to offer the world? The answer came to me as I watched a group of young women walk by below, their outfits a riot of color and personal expression. I had my designs, my vision, my hands that could create beauty from nothing but thread and fabric and imagination. That was enough to begin again. It had to be. Fort Lauderdale became our sanctuary, a place to heal and rebuild. I found work through Elaine, who referred her overflow clients to me. The commissions were smaller than what I'd handled in Miami, but steady, and each successful project built my confidence and my portfolio. Our apartment slowly transformed from a bare-bones refuge to a home. I bought fabric remnants to make curtains and throw pillows. The girls and I painted second-hand furniture in bright colors. We started traditions: Sunday morning pancakes, movie nights on Fridays, beach walks at sunset. "Mama, can I design something too?" Mia asked one evening, peering over my shoulder as I sketched. I pulled her onto my lap, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Of course, sweetheart. What do you want to design?" "A dress for when I'm a famous scientist," she declared, making me smile. "A lab dress? That sounds perfect." I handed her a pencil and we bent over the sketchbook together. These moments, watching my daughters rediscover joy, seeing them bloom in the absence of fear, they fueled me. Every time I felt like giving up, like the climb was too steep, I looked at Olivia and Mia and found my resolve again. Daniel tried to find us, of course. He called friends, showed up at my old clients' homes, even hired a private investigator. But I'd been careful, covering our tracks, and the people who knew where we were remained loyal to our secret. After about a year, the search seemed to cool. Perhaps he'd moved on, found someone else to control. Or perhaps he'd simply realized we weren't coming back. Either way, the fear of him finding us began to recede, like a tide going out so gradually you barely notice until one day you realize the shoreline has changed. It was around this time that I met Maria, an elderly Cuban woman who lived in the apartment below ours. She'd been a seamstress in Havana before fleeing to Florida in the 1960s, and her fingers, though now gnarled with arthritis, still moved with the precision of someone who had spent decades with needle and thread. "You have the gift," she told me one afternoon as she watched me work on a beaded evening gown for a client. "Not just for sewing, but for seeing. You see what the fabric wants to become." Her words stayed with me, validating something I'd always felt but had never been able to articulate. I did see clothing differently, not just as garments but as possibilities, as expressions of the wearer's true self. With Maria's encouragement, I started designing my own small collection in the evenings after the girls were asleep. Not haute couture like at Salvator, but something more accessible, more real. Clothes for women like me, women rebuilding their lives, balancing work and family, wanting to feel both comfortable and beautiful. I called the collection Phoenix, for obvious reasons. When the initial 10-piece collection was complete, I photographed each item on a friend who was the same size as my target demographic, a working mother in her 30s. Then, scraping together the last of my savings, I built a simple website and launched it into the world with a mix of terror and exhilaration. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I checked the website obsessively, but the visitor count remained dismally low. I was beginning to think I'd miscalculated, that starting my own line had been a foolish dream when Elaine called. "Elena, have you seen it?" Her voice was breathless with excitement. "Seen what?" "The feature on Style Miami's website. They did a spread on emerging designers, and you're one of them." I nearly dropped the phone. Style Miami was one of the most influential fashion blogs in South Florida. A feature could change everything. I rushed to my laptop, and there it was, a gorgeous spread featuring my Phoenix collection, with a write-up that nearly brought me to tears. In a fashion landscape often dominated by excess, Elena Salvator's Phoenix collection offers something revolutionary: authenticity. These are clothes designed by a woman who understands that true luxury isn't about logos or price tags, but about how a garment makes you feel. Every piece in this meticulously crafted collection speaks to resilience, to rising from the ashes of what was to embrace what could be. Within hours, orders started coming in. Small at first, then a steady stream. By the end of the week, half the collection was sold out, and I was fielding inquiries from boutiques interested in carrying Phoenix pieces. For the first time since leaving Salvator Luxe, I allowed myself to believe that I could make it on my own terms, that I could build something that was truly mine. What I didn't know then was that Vincent Salvator had seen the feature too, and that my success, minor as it was, had registered as both a surprise and an affront. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was dropping the girls off at school. "Elena, it's your father." His voice, so familiar and yet so distant, sent a jolt through me. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd heard it, since that day in his office when I'd walked away from Salvator Luxe. "How did you get this number?" I asked, sliding back into my car. "I have my ways." A pause. "I saw your collection, the Phoenix line." I waited, unsure what to say. Part of me, a small, stubborn part that had never quite given up on him, hoped for praise, for acknowledgement of what I'd accomplished on my own. "It's interesting," he said finally. "Different from what we do at Salvator, of course, more accessible, but there's potential there." "Thank you," I said stiffly, wondering where this was going. "I'm calling because I think it's time you came home, Elena, to the family, to the company." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were offering me something I'd been desperately waiting for. "Nicholas is moving to our European division, and we need someone to head up our contemporary line. It could be a good fit for you." The offer landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of confusion through me. After everything, the theft of my designs, the years of dismissal, the complete absence during my darkest days with Daniel, he expected me to come running back at his call. "I'm building my own company," I said, finding my voice. "Phoenix is just the beginning. I have plans, vision." Vincent sighed, and I could almost see him pinching the bridge of his nose, a gesture he made when he was trying to be patient. "Elena, be practical. You're a single mother with 2 young children. How long can you sustain this on your own? At Salvator, you'd have resources, security. The Salvator name still means something in this industry." "So does mine," I replied, a new steel in my voice. "My own name, and that's what I'm building on now." There was a long silence. When Vincent spoke again, his tone had chilled. "I see. Well, the offer remains open. When you're ready to be sensible, call me." The line went dead, and I sat in the school parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel. The conversation had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Not because I was tempted by his offer, I wasn't, but because it forced me to confront how far I still had to go, how precarious my new beginning remained. But there was something else too, something unexpected, a flicker of satisfaction. Vincent Salvator, the great fashion magnate, had noticed what I was building, had felt compelled to reach out, to try to bring me back into the fold. It wasn't an apology or an acknowledgement of the wrong he'd done me. But it was something, a crack in his armor, a sign that perhaps someday there might be a reckoning. That night I sketched until dawn, ideas flowing like I hadn't experienced in years. By morning, I had the outlines of my next collection, bolder, more confident, with echoes of the Salvator heritage but filtered through my own unique perspective. I named it Ascendant. 5 years passed like the turning of pages in a well-worn book, familiar yet revealing something new with each revolution. Phoenix Fashion grew from a one-woman operation in a Fort Lauderdale apartment to a respected name in the industry, with a studio in Miami's design district and a team of talented designers under my guidance. We specialized in what fashion critics called attainable luxury, beautifully made pieces with thoughtful details and versatile styling, at price points that made them accessible to a wider range of women than traditional luxury brands. Our motto, "Designed for the lives women actually lead," became something of a rallying cry among our devoted customers. The growth hadn't been without stumbles. There was the production disaster in our second year, when a manufacturer in Portugal sent us an entire shipment of blouses with misaligned patterns. The season we misjudged a color trend and were left with racks of unsold mint green pieces. The time a major department store backed out of a deal at the last minute, leaving us scrambling to find new retail partners. But with each challenge, we adapted and learned. I discovered I had a head for business after all, not in the cutthroat, profit at all costs way my father practiced it, but in a more sustainable, relationship-focused approach that valued long-term growth over quick wins. "Ms. Salvator, the investors are here," my assistant, Jamie, announced, poking her head into my office. I glanced at the clock, surprised to see it was already time for the meeting. I'd been lost in sketches for our upcoming fall collection, inspired by the architecture of Miami's Art Deco district. "Thank you, Jamie. Please show them to the conference room. I'll be right there." I gathered my presentation materials, taking a moment to check my appearance in the small mirror on the wall. At 38, I still looked like a Salvator, dark eyes, high cheekbones, the slight wave in my hair that came from my mother's Italian side. But there was something else in my face now, something that hadn't been there in my Salvator Luxe days. Confidence, perhaps, or simply the peace that comes from building something true to your own vision. The meeting went well. The investment group, a venture capital firm that specialized in female-founded businesses, was interested in helping us expand our e-commerce operations and open our first flagship store. They liked our growth trajectory, our loyal customer base, and our commitment to ethical manufacturing practices. "Your numbers are impressive, Ms. Salvator," the lead investor said as we wrapped up. "But what really stands out to us is the brand loyalty you've cultivated. Your customers don't just buy your clothes, they believe in what Phoenix represents." I thought about that comment later that evening as I drove to pick up Olivia and Mia from their after-school activities. The girls were 13 and 11 now, developing their own distinct personalities and interests. Olivia was showing real talent as a cellist, while Mia remained fascinated by science, particularly marine biology. What did Phoenix represent? I'd never articulated it explicitly, but I knew it was tied to our story, mine and my daughter's. It was about resilience, yes, but also about authenticity, about creating a life that reflected your true values rather than someone else's expectations. As I pulled into the parking lot of the music school where Olivia took lessons, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, with a Miami area code. "Elena Salvator," I answered, expecting perhaps a new client or a press inquiry. "Elena, it's Leo." My younger brother's voice sent a jolt through me. I hadn't spoken to either of my brothers since leaving Salvator Luxe. Nicholas had moved to Milan to oversee the European operations, as my father had mentioned, and Leo had stayed in Miami, apparently taking on a larger role in the company. "Leo," I said, keeping my tone neutral, "this is unexpected." He cleared his throat. "I know I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this, but there's something you should know." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Is it father? Is he ill?" "No, not ill exactly, but Salvator Luxe is in trouble, serious trouble." I waited, saying nothing, as Leo went on to explain. The company had expanded too aggressively under Nicholas's direction in Europe, opening boutiques in cities where the market couldn't support them. At the same time, they'd failed to adapt to changing consumer preferences, sticking with the old Salvator formula of formal luxury when the market was moving toward more versatile, sustainable options. "We're over-leveraged," Leo admitted, a note of desperation in his voice. "The banks are calling in loans. There's talk of bankruptcy, of selling the company to one of the major luxury conglomerates." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Father wants to see you. He thinks you might be able to help, that you might have ideas for how to turn things around." I laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. Now he wants my ideas, after dismissing them for years, after letting Nicholas steal my designs. "I know," Leo said quietly. "I know it's a lot to ask, but this isn't just about Father or Nicholas or me. It's about the Salvetter legacy, about all the people who work for us, the pattern makers, the seamstresses, the retail staff. They didn't do anything wrong." He was right, and that was the most frustrating part. Salvetter Lux employed hundreds of people, many of whom had been with the company for decades. They didn't deserve to lose their livelihoods because of my father's pride or my brother's mismanagement. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "I can't promise anything." "That's fair," Leo conceded. "But please don't take too long, time isn't on our side." After we hung up, I sat in the car for a long moment, my mind racing. The rational part of me said to stay away, to let Vincent Salvetter and his precious sons face the consequences of their actions. They'd never stood by me when I needed them. Why should I rush to their rescue? But another part of me, the part that still remembered the awe I'd felt as a child, watching my father drape fabric on a mannequin, creating something beautiful from nothing, hesitated. Salvetter Lux was my heritage too, however complicated. Could I really stand by and watch it crumble if there was something I could do to prevent it? I was still turning these questions over in my mind when Olivia emerged from the building, cello case in hand, chatting animatedly with a friend. Seeing her, confident, happy, flourishing, reminded me of what really mattered. Whatever I decided about Salvetter Lux, it would be on my terms, with my daughter's well-being as the top priority. That night after the girls were asleep, I did something I hadn't done in years. I researched Salvetter Lux. I read industry analyses, financial reports, social media discussions about the brand. What I found confirmed Leo's assessment. The company was floundering, caught between an outdated business model and a changed marketplace. But I also discovered something interesting. Despite its troubles, the Salvetter name still carried weight. People associated it with quality, with craftsmanship, with a certain timeless elegance. The foundations were solid. It was the execution that had gone awry. An idea began to form, not a rescue plan exactly, but something more like a redirection. Something that could potentially preserve what was valuable about Salvetter Lux while letting go of what wasn't working. The next morning, I called Leo back. "I'll meet with Father," I said, "but not at the Salvetter offices. Neutral ground. And I want to be clear, I'm not promising anything except a conversation." Leo agreed readily, suggesting a private dining room at a discreet restaurant in Coral Gables. We set a date for the following week. As the meeting approached, I found myself increasingly tense. James, my boyfriend of 2 years, noticed my distraction during a dinner date. "You're a million miles away tonight," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. James was a professor of art history at the University of Miami, thoughtful, kind, with a steadiness that had been balm to my soul after the tumult with Daniel. "I'm sorry," I squeezed his hand. "I have a lot on my mind. I'm meeting with my father next week." James's eyebrows shot up. He knew the broad outlines of my history with the Salvetter family, though I'd never shared all the details. "That's significant. How do you feel about it?" I considered the question, trying to untangle the knot of emotions in my chest. Conflicted. Part of me wants to tell him exactly where he can go with his problems, but another part, I don't know, maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's some lingering hope that he'll finally see me, really see me. "Whatever you decide, I'm here," James said simply. "And for what it's worth, I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. You've built something remarkable, Alina. Don't lose sight of that." His words stayed with me as I prepared for the meeting, helping me find my center when doubts crept in. I was no longer the wounded designer fleeing her family's betrayal. I was a successful businesswoman with a growing company and a vision all my own. I could face Vincent Salvetter as an equal. The day of the meeting arrived with a dramatic Miami thunderstorm, rain lashing against the windows of my car as I drove to the restaurant. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A Phoenix design, of course, a tailored jumpsuit in deep blue that projected confidence without trying too hard. The private dining room was at the back of the restaurant, discreetly separated from the main dining area. Vincent was already there when I arrived, standing by the window watching the rain. He turned as I entered, and I was struck by how much he had aged. His once black hair was now completely silver, and there were deep lines around his eyes and mouth that hadn't been there 5 years ago. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying a warmth I hadn't expected. "Thank you for coming." I stayed near the door, not yet ready to cross the room to him. "Leo said you wanted to talk, so talk." Vincent gestured to the table, which was set for lunch. "Can we sit, please?" I moved to the table, taking the seat that put my back to the wall rather than the window, a habit I'd developed during the Daniel years, always positioning myself with a clear view of exits. "I've been following your success with Phoenix," Vincent began after we'd ordered. "You've built something impressive in a short time. The industry is taking notice." "I know," I said simply. I didn't need his validation anymore, though a small, stubborn part of me still registered the satisfaction of hearing it. Vincent nodded, seeming to understand that flattery wouldn't get him far. "Leo probably told you about our situation. It's not good. We've made mistakes. I've made mistakes." The admission surprised me. Vincent Salvator rarely acknowledged errors. "The market has changed," he continued. "Consumers want different things now, more versatility, more sustainability, more authenticity." The irony wasn't lost on me. These were exactly the directions I'd been pushing for during my time at Salvator Luxe, directions that had been dismissed as impractical or off-brand. "And now you think I can help you adapt?" I asked, unable to keep a hint of sarcasm from my voice. Vincent met my gaze directly. "Yes, I do. You understand this new landscape in a way that Nicholas and Leo don't, in a way that I don't, if I'm being honest. You've always had an instinct for where fashion was heading." I took a sip of water, giving myself a moment to process his words. This was as close to an admission of error as I was likely to get from my father. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked finally. "Come back to Salvator Luxe, not as a designer but as creative director for the entire company. Full autonomy over the brand direction, the collections, everything. Nicholas will stay in Europe in a reduced role, and Leo will handle operations." The offer was generous, more generous than I'd expected. It was also, I realized, exactly what I would have wanted 5 years ago. To be recognized, to be given the authority to shape the Salvator legacy according to my vision. But I wasn't the same person I'd been 5 years ago. "And what about Phoenix?" I asked. "I'm not abandoning what I've built." Vincent hesitated, clearly having hoped I would simply fold Phoenix into Salvator. "We could discuss a structure where Phoenix continues as a separate entity, perhaps as a subsidiary of Salvator Luxe." I shook my head. "Phoenix stays independent, that's non-negotiable." Our food arrived, giving us both a moment to regroup. As we ate, Vincent filled me in on more details of Salvator Luxe's situation. It was worse than Leo had indicated. They'd lost significant market share, particularly among younger consumers, and several key designers had left for competitors. The company wasn't just in financial trouble, it was losing its creative soul. "I understand why you left," Vincent said suddenly, setting down his fork. "After what happened with your collection with Nicholas, I should have handled it differently." I looked at him, searching his face for signs of manipulation, but found only a tired resignation. "Yes, you should have." "I was wrong," he said simply, "and I've paid for that mistake, we all have." It wasn't quite an apology, but from Vincent Salvator it was.